So in today's tutorial, I'm going to explain to you the latest version of the Cinematographer Kit. So I'll be using the natural profile, showing you a little bit of linear, HLG, and Log V3, which has of course replaced Log V2. I'll show you various examples, differences between them, and what they look like when they're color graded with LUTs from Filmic Pro as well. Let's get into the comparisons. So looking at Filmic Pro now, if you go to the bottom left where the white balance menu is, and on the left hand side of that, 3 emblems down, you can see the Cinematographer Kit. Now we're going to start looking at the natural profile here, and you can see with the natural profile, it looks really nice, the colors are really popping, but when we start comparing these to the different color profiles that you can use in Filmic Pro, you'll see a real difference. So if we go into linear, which is what used to be dynamic on the older phones, these shadows are really dark now. So you're losing basically all the information in the shadow areas, and it's completely pitch black in those points of the shot. So if we then go into HLG, which is hybrid log gamma, which is what used to be flat on the older phones, we've got a lot more dynamic range in those darker areas and in the lighter areas too. So on the left hand side where it says Mora, that green sign on the left, you can see that the shadows that were pitch black in the linear are much lighter now. If we go to Log V3, we lose even more saturation in the colors, and in doing so and bringing up the shadows and bringing down the highlights, we're saving more information. So you can see more detail in those darker areas of the image. And if you look at them all side by side here, the natural really looks lovely. Linear is way too dark for me personally. HLG is getting less saturation, and Log V3 way less saturation. Now I won't be using linear for the rest of this video. Linear to me is a little too dark. It's just not something I would use, and it's very over stylized. So for this, I'm going to leave that aside and then carry on looking at the other profiles. So natural here, you can see the colors once again looking great, but in this different image that we're using now, you can see underneath the bridge where the green algae is on the brickwork there, it's not that clear, it's not that detailed. So as we look to the HLG, you can see there's a lot more detail in the brickwork there underneath the bridge, and you start to see a bit more detail all around the whole image as well as we're lifting those shadows and decreasing the highlights. This is the Filmic Pro D-LUT for HLG, which is from the Filmic Pro website for free. I'd highly recommend you download these. The colours really pop when you add the LUT to this HLG profile, and looks really good. With Log V3, you can see underneath the bridge where the brickwork is there, it's actually starting to gain quite a lot of noise. As you're raising those shadows, you're also raising the noise that you otherwise wouldn't see without Log V3. However, with the LUT added, you can see that you get some really nice colouring there, the whole image looks nice, and you're not seeing that kind of really heavy noise that you were seeing when we were just using Log V3 without the LUT. Now with the different colour profiles side by side, you can actually see how the highlights are handled from profile to profile to profile. So natural, you can see the clouds are actually quite blown out in the highlights, whereas HLG really handles the highlights very well, and Log V3 does too. So you've got really good options there with HLG and Log V3, whereas natural struggles with the highlights. So let's take a look at the shadow side of these color profiles. Now in natural, you are getting a little bit of noise on the left hand side, but very minimal. On an iPhone and Android, you're going to get some noise, but it's about minimizing that noise. With HLG, the clouds are handled slightly better, as we've seen before with the highlights, and we're starting to get a little bit of noise creeping in on the right side and a little bit more on the left where it's darker. Now with Log V3, because we're raising those shadows so much and the sensor on our phone is so small, it really does unveil quite a lot of noise there, and I call them dancing bugs, which we really don't want. But what is impressive with Log V3 as well as HLG is how they handle the noise once the Filmic Pro LUTs have been activated. So again with HLG, you can't really make out much noise, and you'd have to be really pixel peeping to be able to see the noise now. And when we go to Log V3, that's the same, and they look really identical too. The quality is excellent. But because they look so identical, I started to wonder if you could tell the difference between the two. So now I want to ask you guys a question watching. With these side by side, can you tell the difference between HLG and Log V3? So now we're taking a look at these side by sides. For me, it was really hard to decipher which one was which, and I actually made this up, so you can see now it's really difficult. But when you actually get the answers, it might seem a little bit more obvious. With HLG on the left and Log V3 on the right, the only difference to me was the colours were slightly richer in Log V3 compared to HLG, but that's really pixel peeping. So after looking at different clips, I was looking through HLG clips and Log V3 clips and wondering what is the benefit of using Log V3 over HLG, apart from getting maybe 10% richer colours. So I messaged Filmic Pro and they had this to say. The HLG Log V2 and Log V3/V3 Plus profiles deliver similar dynamic range. However, the Log V3 family manages colours better. Film Convert has deep support for Log V3, facilitating camera profile matching. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, Film Convert, by their own description, is a film emulation and grain suite that gives you the beautiful classic look of film for your project in just a few clicks. With dedicated camera packs for every major camera brand, you can deliver professional video that deserves to be shown on the big screen. So you can put in whatever your camera brand is that you're using, and you can put in iPhone. Unfortunately, you can't use this with Android. With 50%, you can see here the grain that you can use, 100% level grain that you can use to make your film look like old film stock. So it's a bit like using a LUT, but you're actually applying a old film look. So they're using the sensor from your iPhone and then bridging the differences between your iPhone sensor to that of a different camera from the old days, and then making that as close as possible so you can emulate that film stock look. As well as 19 film stocks, you can export 3D LUTs, and you can download your own free trial. Now, it is quite expensive. I don't get any cut from people buying this or anything like that. I'm just telling you about it. So Film Convert, the whole bundle that gives you all the plugins, is $200. If you want to use it for After Effects or Adobe, DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, it's $139. Now, for those of you who haven't got the Cinematographer Kit yet, or you just haven't explored the Cinematographer Kit yet, there's a few features that you might find helpful as well built into that kit. Now, if we go back into our white balance, then a few options down, we go into our Cinematographer Kit. You can see we've got Natural Profile, Linear, HLG, and Log V3 Profile. Just to the top right, you can see we've got 10-bit coloring, which is what I'm using for all my videos and my films. And below it, you've got these water drops along a graph. So the black water drop, where it's got 0 in it, that is your shadows. So you can slide that up the graph, and you can see the shadows disappearing, which brings up the whole image into more of a highlight, milky image. And then the middle grey water drop is your midtones. So again, you can bring that one up in a similar way, and then back down for your midtones to decrease them or increase the midtones. And then highlights, exactly the same thing. If you push the highlights down too far, you start bringing down the midtones as well, which gives you a really strange looking image. And then just to reset all of that, you've got these red arrows in the top left, tap on those, and that resets the whole image and all your settings for the Cinematographer Kit there. Now you've got shadows just below. If you want to alter your shadows, I would generally do this in post-production, but if you want to do it in camera live, then you can bring that down. This works better than the drops above because it's slightly more detailed and specific than the options above to change your shadows. I'll reset that. And then with highlights, you can bring them down as you look at the window there, or you can bring them up and you can reset that if you don't want to do that. On the bottom left here, where the water drops come into play, you just tap on this one, and that brings up your RGBs, your reds, your greens, your blues, and saturation and vibrance. Now you can actually use your finger to slide any one of these colors down, and that will affect the coloring of your image. So when you hit record, this would be the color you get. You can do that with all 3 of them to different levels, whichever one you'd want to do if you want to do that. And you can hit reset on the top left to reset those. Now below is saturation. This is one that actually is handy because in my short film Plant Lady that I made a few years ago, I actually used this to create a black and white image. If you bring the saturation up, the colors really obviously get too saturated, oversaturated. But if you bring this right down, you can see that it goes black and white. So I used this actually to create a black and white image. And you can see all over here, it looks like an old classic kind of film. So you don't have to do this in post-production, you can do this in camera. I did this for Plant Lady and it worked really, really well. I'm gonna hit the reset button here, and then vibrance, of course, increases or decreases. Now I'd always advise doing these things in post-production, but if that's not really an option for you, and you wanna create something a bit wacky, a bit crazy, you can use these RGB curves. Or if you wanna create a black and white option for your film, take down that saturation right down, and you've got yourself a really nice looking black and white film. My personal opinion is if you don't want to get into color grading, you don't need to buy the Cinematographer Kit, you really don't. As long as you get your white balance set properly, you've got your ISO as low as you can so that you get the least amount of noise, you're gonna be set to go. And I've had people ask me what color grading tools did I use or LUTs did I use on films that I only use natural on. So if you don't want to do color grading, you're wanting just to make nice professional looking videos and films, then that'll be just fine. If you want to get into color grading though, the Cinematographer Kit is 100% a worthwhile purchase. It's not that expensive. And I know people complain about people having to buy extra for the little add-ons that come onto Filmic Pro, but people are having to use their time to actually make this, so it's not worth people making anything for free, is it? Because you can't pay your bills for free. So I think the Cinematographer Kit is well worth it if you want to get into color grading. HLG is a really, I think, probably the best and safest way to go because you're going to save detail on the highlights, save some detail on the shadows, and get minimal noise compared to Log V3 where you're going to get a little bit more noise perhaps, unless you want to use Film Convert and add grain, that kind of thing, and give yourself more of an old film stock footage look, which will then kind of hide a lot of that noise. But for me, I think I'll stick with HLG, which is what flat is on the older phones, I've used that in the past, and I think I'll continue to use that in the future. If you want to learn more about Filmic Pro, guys, then check out my playlist that's now on screen. It has pretty much everything you need to know about Filmic Pro, and I'm always adding to it as well. Take care, see you on the next one. Bye bye.